Well, hello, class, and welcome to our latest installment in Literary Devices of the Stars. So today we'll be talking about diction. Diction. All right, so what do we mean by diction? Well, it comes from the Latin for mode of expression. And so we're talking about the choice and arrangement of words. So sometimes you'll hear the terms word choice, word order used relative to diction. But here we're using diction as an umbrella term for not only choice, but also arrangement, otherwise known as syntax. Okay, so diction can be analyzed by in a few different ways. So the first lens through which we're going to look at it is examining the degree to which words adhere to the following. So are they abstract or concrete? Are they colloquial or formal? Common or technical? Literal or figurative? And are they Latinate or Anglo-Saxon? So knowing the answer to all these things, being able to conduct a reasonable analysis of these dimensions is going to help us to run an analysis, say, of a poem or a piece of prose, a short story novel, or even creative nonfiction. Okay, so abstract or concrete. So an abstraction is something that is an idea. So we can't quite put our fingers on it. We can try to define it, but if you look at abstractions in the dictionary, for example, you're going to have these sort of protracted attempts to explain what things are, such as beauty. Okay, so these are typically broad or general. They describe a domain of thought, and as I suggested before, strength. In addition to beauty, then we have strength. So, how do you define that? How strong are we talking about? That sort of thing. Skinny, what exactly do we mean by that? Or someone that's old. So I've got a picture here of a middle-aged woman. And so if I'd said, she was a middle-aged woman, well, certain connotations are going to spring to mind for you. Here is an example of a middle-aged woman, probably not what you had in mind. Certainly wasn't what I had in mind when I looked up, sort of images for middle-aged women. But I wanted to put her picture there as an example of how, what the range might be. So if you want to talk about someone who is middle-aged, you would want to, instead of just using middle-aged woman, you want to use concrete things. So does the woman that you are describing have gray hair? Is she wearing glasses? What kind of glasses? Are they horn rimmed? Or are they, sort of plastic tortoise shell? Are they, sort of big around as saucers? Or are they smaller, kind of like the sort of John Lennon type lenses you might think? So the more you can kind of drill down to concreteness, which we're going to talk about now, the better is going to be your description. The more effective is going to be your description. So when we're talking about concrete language, this is tangibility. And again, we can't exactly capture tangibility, but we can get much, much closer than we would with abstract language. So the specifics here, so forgive my joke about a cinder block being used as an example of concrete language. But there's another way of thinking, that's sensory concrete language. So here we're talking about lips the color of a budding rose. So the question I might ask you is, are the rosebuds you imagine the same as the rosebuds that I might imagine? And they're probably not going to be the same, but they should be relatively similar. So when we think about the color of lips, we're probably thinking about a red rose, a pink rose type thing. Definitely not a yellow rose, because that would suggest someone with a severe, potentially lethal case of jaundice. And a white rose, I mean, that person's done. Okay, so we're looking down at them in a pine box, more than likely. Okay, so the other way to think of language here is common versus technical. So when we're talking about common words, this is under the category of general terminology, universally understood, and it's a shortcut to meaning. So communication, the words we use and so forth is meant to communicate ideas. Okay, so as you know, probably from your texting behavior, you can shortcut the heck out of things, and you can bust out the LOL and the BRB, and people know what it is that you mean if they are familiar with those expressions, those acronyms, okay? So then under technical language, it's a different thing almost entirely. So now we're talking about specific terminology. And these are words that are not universally understood. So not understood by a 5-year-old, and maybe not even understood by a 95-year-old, depending on the subject that you are addressing. Okay, so like concrete language, it seeks to eliminate ambiguity. Okay, all right. So this is an example. So over there on the left-hand side of this image, the circle is around a part of the anatomy that most people refer to as the hamstrings. So if somebody says, yeah, I'm laid up for a few weeks because I yanked a hammy in the 5K I ran this past weekend, then most people know what area of the body we're talking about. However, if you go from the common terminology of hamstring to something that's more technical, then we know that that particular muscle there, medially, is the semitendinosus, and more laterally is going to be the biceps femoris. Okay, so these are the terms that an anatomy and physiology type would use, maybe a medical doc. Okay, so here the other circle we have here is around the area that most of us would consider to be the calf. Okay, but the technical term for that, the medical term, is gastrocnemius. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. All right, so in terms of colloquial versus formal words. All right, so colloquial language then is presented in a conversational manner. It resembles everyday usage, sort of casual conversations you might have in the hallway or over a relaxed breakfast with someone. And it's going to include expressions that are not used by the culture at large. So again, this is under the category of a more casual sort of conversation. All right, now formal language, by contrast, is what we use to describe dignified, impersonal, sort of elevated use. Okay, does not reflect the way that people speak in an everyday or casual context. Okay, unless you are from a super formal family where you refer to the man who helped produce you as father versus dad, daddy, pops, that sort of thing. Okay, so formal language is devoid of idiomatic expressions, contractions, or slang. We'll talk about slang in a moment. Very few common and simple words, and often employs extravagant sort of language. So in a say formal essay that you might write for, I don't know, this class, you were probably going to use formal, dare I say, academic type language. Now, not always. I mean, I'll talk to you about how you can drop more colloquial expressions, say in your introduction, or to establish context for your piece. But generally, in academic writing, we're using formal language. Okay, so another way to look at it is the levels of language. So we've already talked about formal, and the definition there doesn't change. But we have informal. Okay, so and then some of the other terms we're going to take a look at is going to be slang, poetic, diction, and then jargon. Okay, so informal is relaxed but polite conversation. You'll say that this is similar to colloquial language, but again, this is just another lens for examining diction, another way to talk about word choice. Okay, so here's an example from a poem by Billy Collins called "Man in Space." All you have to do is listen to the way a man sometimes talks to his wife at a table of people, and notice how intent he is on making his point, even though her lower lip is beginning to quiver. And you will know why the women in science fiction movies who inhabit a planet of their own are not pictured making a salad or reading a magazine when the men from Earth arrive in their rocket, why they are always standing in a semicircle, their arms folded, their bare legs set apart, their breasts protected by hard metal discs. Okay, so if you examine the language that's used here, this is all relatively informal type, relatively simple kind of common speech that we would read or hear spoken almost anywhere. Okay. All right. Now slang. Slang is often characterized as being impolite. So you generally would not want to use slang on a formal essay. You wouldn't want to use slang in a job interview. with say a big three accounting firm or something like that, you might use slang if you are applying for a job in a super relaxed environment, maybe I don't know, maybe at a Microsoft or a Google or something like that. But again, you're going to have to make that call based on context. And so slang also includes newly minted words, neologisms, okay, and expressions that would be fresh into the lexicon of the day. Okay, so slang generally is related to contemporary usage, what's happening now. Okay, so when I say it's generally associated with young or rebellious language users, what I mean by that is that young people, okay, I mean, language can be used to include, but also to exclude. Okay, so young people use expressions that, you know, moms and pops, they don't know what that means. Okay, and they do that so that moms and pops don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so it excludes the adults that have such free reign in their lives and includes people in their own small, you know, we would call discourse community. Okay. So here I've got the aging hipster who says, "This ain't it, Chief." So that, you know, that might classify as some slang. You know, maybe last year it would have been "Okay, Boomer." Would have been an example of a slang term. Here in Memphis, and this is really old, but the word "junt." Okay, "junt" is you know, like other parts of speech can be used for multiple parts of speech. So "junt" could refer to almost anything. Okay, but that would be considered slang, and Memphis slang in particular. Okay, so dialect then, from the Greek for speaking together. So this is spoken language of a people, and of course also written, whose specific geographical location, cultural heritage, or position in society makes their diction, phonetics is the way we pronounce words, and grammar distinct from those of other peoples. Okay, so when I say spoken, it's easier to determine someone's dialect. So people from, say, Memphis would speak in a way that is different from those who say are native to Nashville or Knoxville or Elizabethton, like up in the mountains and so forth. North Alabama, right? Georgia. Each of those places has got a different dialect. Certain parts of Boston are going to have a different dialect. Like the Southeast, people from South Boston, their dialect is going to be different from those in the North End, different from say New Hampshire. Southern Maine is going to differ from Northern Maine. The closer you get to, say, Canada, Nova Scotia, then the dialect is going to change. But we can also write dialect, okay, so that it sounds like, when spoken, a reflection of someone's spoken language. So here's Catherine Howard McCann's poem called "Hazel Tells Laverne." "Last night, I'm cleaning out my Howard Johnson's ladies' room when all of a sudden up pops this frog. Must have come from the sewer, swimming around and trying to climb up the side of the bowl. So I goes to flush him down. But so help me God, he starts talking about a golden ball, and how I can be a princess. Me, a princess. Well, my mouth drops all the way to the floor, and he says, 'Kiss me, just kiss me once on the nose.' Well, I screams, 'You little green pervert,' and I hits him with my mop and has to flush the toilet down 3 times. Me, a princess." Okay, so you can see that what McCann has done here is a number of things. So she's used words that are truncated, so like in contractions. So, you know, cannot is the contraction there is CAN', can't. What McCann would have done, as she did with I am, meaning I'm, she just eliminates the apostrophe entirely. Okay, but we know it, seeing it, that it's supposed to be pronounced I'm, not im. Yep. Notice also that she has taken out all capitalization here, especially and most particularly the first person pronoun I. Okay. Now the reason I made the claim earlier that language is used in service of some larger purpose, so that like the central impulse, the central obsession of the poem. So here, what McCann is trying to do is to give us a sense on the page of the spoken language of these two women. Okay, we assume that they are friends, friendly, and they are involved in, you know, sanitation, cleaning, their maids, you know, something of that nature. Okay, so there at the this line here, "So help me God," being written without spaces, again, is supposed to express the sense of her running her words all together because she is in such an excited hurry to tell her story. And you can see all these other elements that make an appearance here as well. Yeah, little green pervert instead of you, little green pervert, and so forth. So it's, again, this is the sort of hyper colloquial slang usage. Okay, jargon then, as another class of usage, is terminology that relates to a specific activity, profession, or group. So like slang, it develops as a kind of shorthand to express ideas that are frequently discussed between members of a group. So I mentioned earlier a discourse community. This is another way to look at, since this is from a rhetoric and composition standpoint, a particular group of people. Okay, so notice that the jargon used by doctors, okay, just physicians in general, would perhaps not be understood by the general public. I mean, you may have experienced this yourself. You go to the doc, and the doc starts, busting out the medical jargon, and you really don't know what she's talking about. Okay, imagine then that if you went to see a cardiologist, okay, so a cardiologist is going to have even more specialized language that, say, a pediatrician would not understand. And likewise, a cardiologist may not understand all the sort of jargon that's used by pediatricians. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. All right, now poetic diction, another level of language where we're using heightened, carefully selected, some might say decorative use of words. Okay, that the intention then is to affect a sense of grace, music. So the way that words play together and how they sound. So we've already talked about this in acoustics, our presentation on acoustics. Okay, brevity and imaginative insight. So when we use figurative devices, it's richer than if we were using strictly, sort of denotative language. All right. So Aristotle argues in the Poetics that poets should use metaphors and unusual words and various stylistic ornaments in order to enhance the experience for the reader. Wordsworth asserts that poetic diction should reflect the colloquial language of men and women in a state of vivid sensation. Okay, so the language is trying to produce an effect in the reader. Okay, all right. Now our second element is arrangement, otherwise known as syntax. Okay, so this is referring to the order of words. So you can also say this as word order if you were talking about this in a say a literary analysis type essay. So the basic question you want to ask about syntax is it ordinary or unusual? So in English, generally, the word order is subject, verb, complement. Now, of course, you can have prepositional phrases, introductory clauses, and things of that nature that would precede a main clause, but generally the constructions of English are subject, verb. Okay, and so when the order changes, something's up. And so this is the kind of thing that you want to attend to when you are analyzing a piece of literature, or when you're just experiencing it, reading a New Yorker article or what have you. So the other thing you want to ask about arrangement of words is what's the effect of the word choice and word order employed by the poet. Okay, your ability to address this is what you're going to need to demonstrate in your analysis papers, and it's going to be the thing that's going to set you apart from most people that examine literature. Okay, all right. So key point: consider the effect of using plain language in a complicated way. So I've got two phrases here. One is a growling dog. Now, if I said that at normal speed, a growling dog, it's a nanosecond between growling and dog. And yet, when the word growling lands, and you start to make meaning from that, you immediately think threat. Okay. And a growling dog, is something that is potentially worth fearing. A barking dog, maybe not so much. But a growling dog, yeah, I'm not sticking my hand anywhere near, the incisors. A growling chipmunk, okay, so that's probably not going to be something that's being particularly threatening. But the word growling alerts you to something up. Now, notice the difference in the second phrase. A dog growling. Most of us have positive connotations with dogs. Okay, so instantly comes to mind maybe a floppy-eared hound, or I don't want to say German Shepherd, probably a little too threatening, but like a beagle, a Chihuahua. Okay, but when it's dog growling, just that nanosecond between dog and growling, the effect of that is more pronounced in the reader. If you really wanted to make it pronounced and say you're writing a poem, then you would break the line after dog, okay, and then have growling as the first word on the next line, so that that brief pause between the end of the line and recognizing when it shows up on the next line, it's a marvelous surprise for the reader. The reader likes this sort of having some work to do. Okay, so you'll hear me, and perhaps this will not make an appearance as I'm mentioning it now, but in a lot of students' essays, students will like knock the reader over the head with information, especially if you were talking about, like, maybe not in a formal, you know, academic setting, but if you're writing, say, a creative nonfiction piece, the reader likes having some work to do. And you probably know this yourselves, right? If you figure out what's happening in a, you know, in a novel, a short story, in a movie, okay, well before the end, that's not very satisfying. Okay, so again, you want to leave the reader with a little bit of work to do. That's not to say you want to, you know, be muddy or clouded in your thinking. Rather, there's a line there, and we're going to talk about how to find that line here in class. So another example here is going to be complicated language in a simple way. So this poem, The Larynx by Alice Jones, and I inadvertently deleted this slide, sorry about that. But if you look up the poem, Alice Jones's poem is an example of what's called Carmina figurata. So that's the formal or technical term for a poem that looks like the thing it's describing, okay? Shape poem is the sort of everyday way of thinking of it. So the larynx then is, another name for it is, you know, Adam's apple, okay? And so if you look up this poem, you'll see that the shape of it on the page looks like, you know, like a larynx, okay? All right, so that's all I've got for you here on diction. I hope this was useful for you. And of course, as always, if you have questions, reach out to me and let me know what they are. All right, peace.